Hi, welcome to the Hunting for Hope podcast. My name is Jessica Goeller, and today I have with me a very special guest, Brother Paul Miller of the Franciscan Servants of Divine Mercy. In this Hunting for Hope podcast, today is our very first episode, and the reason why we're starting this Hunting for Hope podcast is because my son, Lucas Goeller, is in need of another liver transplant. In 2015, Lucas had only days to live, and I didn't know what to do. And God had told me to start another Facebook page, and it exploded. It went international, and Lucas received the liver that he so desperately needed. Well, 8 years later, Lucas needs another liver transplant. And so we are here today to allow people to be a part of our story. Brother Paul?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of this inaugural podcast. I feel like I've been a part of this story since almost the beginning, and I am a Franciscan. I'm a secular Franciscan, and I'm the founder of the Franciscan Servants of Divine Mercy, as Jessica mentioned, and we seek to bring peace, forgiveness, and mercy and healing to people throughout the world. And that's what brought Jessica and I and Lucas together many years ago. And so I'm here to to be part of this whole effort to raise people's awareness about the donation of liver, and as well as the plight of those people who wait on the list, waiting for something to happen so that they can go forward with their lives. So, Jess, why don't you tell us, how did you first find out about when Lucas first got sick? Tell us about that.
Yes, that was a very difficult time, as you can imagine. He was born with an intestinal atresia, and we spent a month in the hospital. And I remember when we left the hospital, I asked one of the staff members why Lucas's eyes were still very yellow. And she said, well, he was just on these something called TPN, and it can be hard on the liver, so it's most likely the reason, and it should go away soon. So a month passed, 2 months passed, 3 months passed, and Lucas was only becoming more and more jaundiced. And at one of our checkups, the surgeon had noticed that Lucas's liver was about as hard as a rock. It was protruding already through his abdomen at 3 months old. We would soon find out that he had a disease called biliary atresia. And basically, from a high level, biliary atresia, um, the internal bile ducts of biliary atresia typically flow in a nice pattern and have a nice flow rate out of the main bile duct of the liver. But with biliary atresia, from a high level, the bile ducts internally are confused. They don't know what's up, down, side, and therefore the bile stays within the liver, and it causes the liver great distress.
So, given that knowledge, how did you feel? How did you, what were you feeling at that moment?
Yeah, I would say this was the beginning of the journey of faith. I was was picking myself off the ground, dragging myself around. It was ugly. I had wondered why God had allowed this to happen to a little baby. I didn't understand. He was completely innocent, yet he was suffering tremendously. Why the baby and why not me? Or maybe what did I ever do wrong? Was I is was did I do something wrong to and now Lucas is suffering. So it was very much a lot of confusion, to say the least. I didn't
Almost
understand.
like a crisis in faith, almost, right?
Very much so.
And,
I didn't know what to do. I felt so alone.
and that I think that's a very common reaction when something like this happens. The first question is why did God do this? you
Yeah.
know, we always want to blame God for things, but as you have realized since then, that God didn't bring this about. This happened through an
Yeah.
accident of nature, and yet God remained by your side during the course of this thing. So from the time you found out about what the condition was, how did things progress after that? What happened next?
Yes. So the doctors had said with biliary atresia, you have basically three options. The first option, you have a 30% chance of making it to adulthood with this liver, the current liver, and 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 doing okay. You have the next one is you have 30% chance of not really doing any better, but not getting any worse. So you're just kind of hanging out in the middle. And the last option was Lucas had a 30% chance of declining rapidly and having to have a liver transplant. And unfortunately for us, our story was the last option. Lucas declined rapidly, and we were put on the transplant list at 10 months of age.
Yeah, I wish we could put up a picture of Lucas at that age. It's shocking to see. He looked like a little bird
Yeah.
with a giant stomach, and it's shot. A picture is worth 1,000 words. If people could see that, I've seen the pictures, and of course, eventually I came to see him. So, how did that happen?
Oh, that was an amazing story in itself. So, one particular day, my mother-in-law called me and said, "Jessica, there's a brother Paul Miller in town, and he's a healer. I don't know much about him, but you should go take Lucas to him." And I said, "Well, that's great. I would love to. What time does it start?" And she said, "In 30 minutes." I said, 30 minutes? Well, you didn't understand at this time. Lucas was so sick. We did a bath. We did a round of medicines. We did another bath. We did some more food. It took me about 2 hours to leave the house. And in my mind, I had given up before I'd even started. There was just no way I was ever going to be able to drop off my older son and then drive 30 minutes. But something inside of me said that I had to go. I had to fight for Lucas. Even though I felt like I was just walking in faith at this point because I had no idea where I was going. I was just reacting. So I reacted and I got there, but I got there a little bit late, and the room was completely packed. We were at St. John and Paul's in Pittsburgh, just outside of Pittsburgh, and we were in this chapel, and there were hundreds of people, just standing room only. And when Lucas and I arrived, people were standing in the hallway just trying to peek in the doorway to see Brother Paul talking. And so I was one of those with a baby peeking through the door, listening to his own journey of faith, which he has posted on his website, brpaul.com. But it's a wonderful story, and I had been praying, wow, I wish that I could have this amazing faith like this man, Brother Paul. And I also prayed that maybe I could someday be friends with him, although I thought it was a far off chance. I wanted you in my life, and I prayed
So,
for it that day.
so from my perspective, I was at the front of the room. Jessica was at the back of the room, outside the door almost. And as she said, there were hundreds of people there, and they had started shortly after I finished speaking. People started to come up to get a blessing, to be blessed, and there were quite a few people actually standing, helping people, directing people where to go, because everybody was clamoring to get up front. And in the very beginning, I started to hear this baby like screaming, almost crying. There was sort of a crying scream, and it just kept getting louder and louder. And I was blessing people, and I felt, oh, this poor whoever this is. I feel terrible because I couldn't see who it was. So I asked one of the ushers guys, said, go find that baby, go find that mother and that baby, and bring her up here so I can, you know, put her out of her misery. It's
True.
so a couple minutes later they came in, and up came Jessica holding this little infant, Lucas, and my first reaction was I couldn't believe. First, he was screaming, but
Yeah.
beyond that, I looked. His stomach was immense. It was so disproportionate to the rest of his body, I knew there was something that was, it had to be something related to his stomach, because I've never seen such a distended looking stomach. And so Jessica came forward, and I asked if I could put my hand on Luke, on the baby. I didn't know the name of the baby. I didn't know Jessica. I didn't know the baby. So I said, "Can I put my hand on the baby's stomach?" And she said, "Yes, go ahead." So I put my hand on Jessica's back, and I put my hand on Lucas's tummy, and he stopped crying immediately. It was a shock, and you had to see the faces of the people in the first 20 or 30 rows, because they saw this like instantaneous change of screaming and crying to nothing, to just complete quietness. And I prayed for him, and I took my hand off of his tummy, and here is this little hand grabs a hold of my hand as I'm moving away, and he puts it back on his stomach. That was my introduction to Lucas and Jessica. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, I remember that, and the amazing part is, like brother said, he's a baby. He's
Right.
maybe 14 months old. He's very behind in his milestones. His body is incredibly thin because he's at this point his liver is failing and he's so malnourished. So, like brother Paul said, his abdomen is completely distended, um, and he looks like a starving child with a gigantic pregnant belly. It was just terrible to see, but to see that was shocking. It was shocking. A crying baby that just goes and stops upon one touch, and then he reached his bony, skinny little hand up and essentially, like you said, pushed your hand into his belly further. From my perspective, also, brother Paul, he started to heat up. Um, his body started to get incredibly hot, and my first instinct was, oh my gosh, he's getting a fever. Fevers were terrible for us. If Lucas had a fever, it was instantly an ER trip. He would be hospitalized for at least a week, and then at home antibiotics for another 6 weeks. It was a horrendous, traumatizing as a mother experience. So Lucas is heating up and he is hot. And all I could think was, oh my gosh, he's getting another fever, and I am fast forwarding already to the ER and having to be separated from the family. So I'm starting to become a little bit distressed. And while this is happening, Lucas is heating up. He starts to get limp. He falls back in the spirit, and he had this little toy in his hand, this little purple toy. And it's like slow motion to me to this day. This room is now as quiet as can be because everybody's in shock. And Lucas falls back, and his little hand flops over, and he drops the toy. And this 1 ounce toy sounded like 1,000 pounds of bricks. It was the loudest noise. And he rested in the spirit, and brother Paul gave us the final blessing. And I was in tears at this point, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I said thank you, and we left. And brother Paul continued to bless. But I remember looking around the room and seeing there were a lot of people crying. A lot.
Many rows worth of people crying.
Yes.
It was one of those moments that you realize that God was present at that moment. And even though there were many wonderful things happened at that particular service, I'm sure that for those people who were close enough to really observe what happened, they were in shock, and it was really a wonderful expression of God's love and healing at that moment. So after you left, what did you think when you were driving home? What were you think?
Well,
What were your thoughts?
Well, I drove straight home. I was a nervous wreck over this fever. And so I laid Lucas down and I grabbed the thermometer and I measured him. It said 98.3. So I was like, oh, I'm doing something wrong. I feel his head. He is hot as can be. This doesn't make sense. I tried again. 98.3. Oh, at this point, I'm mad. I throw the thermometer across the room. I go searching through my container. I find another thermometer. I measure him again. 98.3, and it was like the Holy Spirit smacked me in the head and was like, that was me.
Right.
And I was just blown away at this point. Now once I realized what had happened and that God had touched Lucas in this special way, I, I was in shock. I could feel my body just fill up with so much joy. It's the first time that I really felt God being so close to us in our life and on this journey, because for the longest time, remember, I was saying that I thought he had completely abandoned us. But now all of a sudden, I am feeling so much love. And I get in the car and I go to pick up my other son who's at TT's house. That's my mother-in-law's. And I don't even walk in the door. And she knows it's me. And she says, "Oh my gosh, Jess, something happened at that healing service." And she just started telling a story. There was this mother and there was this baby, and the baby rested in spirit and he dropped the toy. And that's everything that we just told brother Paul and I told you. She told me in about 30 seconds. And then she paused. "Oh my gosh, that was you, wasn't it?" It's like, yep, yep, that was us. And she had said that there were emails flying around and trying to find out who Lucas and I were. Everybody wanted to know who we were. And I remember Brother Paul must have said something in an email that there's something special about that child. And then we didn't see Brother Paul for about a year.
But after that service was over, I spoke to the people that organized the service, and I said, you got to find out who this woman is and this baby, because, this is something extraordinary that God has interceded in such an amazing way. We got to find out who this is, because this just doesn't happen. And it wasn't even the fact that I thought necessarily that Lucas was healed of his physical problem, but I knew right then and there that this was an extraordinary connection between Lucas and I that would be eternal. Yeah, definitely.
It was
So
special.
take us through what happened over the next, whatever it was, a year, I guess,
Oh
almost.
yeah.
Not
So
quite. Was it? I don't think it was a year, was it? I don't think so. I don't know. I don't
it
remember.
it was very close, Brother Paul, to a year. Because I about we'll say about a year had passed.
Hmm.
We had this amazing experience with Brother Paul, and I felt that love. Lucas, he only continued to get worse. So I knew God had touched him in some way, but I knew that it wasn't a healing that
It
I could
wasn't a physical healing.
yes, yeah,
Right.
that I could specifically see, like,
Right. Right.
because
Yeah.
his liver continued to get bigger. His belly continued to get grossly bigger. At this point, he is very high risk for death at any second, because the blood flow can no longer flow smoothly through his liver. So blood is trying to find alternative ways, and it's swelling up and overloading the vascular system and other areas. So his veins are getting bigger and bigger. And the doctor had said, at any point, one of these veins, they could burst. And I just want you to know that the doctors are going to have a hard time stopping the bleeding. I just want you to know. Okay, well, we'll see what God says, because what am I going to do at this point? And worrying isn't going to help me. I just have to enjoy Lucas every day that I can. I know that God had interceded on his behalf in some way. I just, at this point, I don't understand how or what. So Lucas continues to get worse, and out of nowhere, he gets this virus. And when I say it onset out of nowhere, we were sitting in the hospital and they were about to release us the following day, because he had been getting better from whatever kind of uh, illness he was fighting. And so we were getting in preparation to go home, and his brother had just left, and Lucas is now eating food. And I look at him, and he starts to breathe. He's breathing, mouth breathing. He's starting to breathe extremely heavy, and his eyes start to glaze over. And I'm like, Lucas, are you okay? And I pull his food from him, and I'm thinking that, oh, maybe this happens sometimes. His belly's so distended, and there's not much room with his growing spleen and his huge liver. maybe his all this food on his stomach is compressing his lungs. And so this will pass, this will pass. And I look like it's like a nightmare. I look at the machines and I could just see ticking up his heart rate was just going up. Now the bells and whistles are blowing. The nurse comes in, and when I say this was out from a movie, it was next thing we know, I'm sitting on the bed with him, just praying that he continues to breathe as they're running us down the hall to the ICU. And they're screaming for the elevator, make sure the elevator's there. The doctors, where's the doctors? He could stop breathing any moment. And Lucas, at this point, um, we make it to the ICU. We almost lose him that night because his blood pressure dumps down really low, and they're like, literally, doctor was screaming orders, the nurse was running around, and they're just trying to stabilize him. And it took a long time, and they finally stabilized him enough. But he was in so bad shape. His lungs had completely collapsed. They put him on a ventilator. And for about 2 weeks, he did not improve. He was on the ventilator. He had been at some point placed on the highest liver transplant rating list. So he was moved to the very top of the liver transplant list because of this. And he didn't receive one liver donation offer, which was very, very, very hard, because that was the only thing at this point that was going to save him. And so it's been 2 weeks, and I get a message. Brother Paul is on his way, and he'll be here to bless Lucas. And I was like, Brother Paul, how did he know that we were in the hospital suffering on these last days of Lucas's life? How did he know? And I was just so thrilled that we haven't talked to Brother Paul since that one miraculous day that we just referenced. And now he was coming to see us. I was completely in awe.
The 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 person who organized the healing service did a good job. He tracked down who Jessica was and tracked down Lucas's story, and he had been keeping me apprised of what was happening, and so he was trying to make sure that I knew what was going on. And it was very unusual because I see literally hundreds of thousands of people, but this case was so different, and it was so obviously orchestrated by God. I had more of a normal interest than I usually have to try to see what was going to happen. So I did make the trip to see Lucas in the hospital. So that's when I came the second time. So go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So at this point, we are down to Lucas hasn't made any improvements on the ventilator. He has not tried to breathe on his own at all. And as a mom, that it's coming down to this is it. So we knew Brother Paul was coming, and we believed in the power of prayer, and we know that God had touched Lucas previously. So we had hope. That we had hope is what I could say. So the waiting room on the fifth floor of the ICU was filled with family members praying the rosary, and Brother Paul came in and blessed Lucas. I of course had my head down. As you were blessing him, I remember Brother Paul's assistant Ani screaming out, "He opened his eyes and looked at Brother Paul." Um, and so Brother Paul finished his blessings, and he gave me a blessing, and he gave the waiting room a blessing, and then he left. The very next day, the doctors came in to check Lucas, and they said, "Wow, our Lucas, he's turning it around. He's starting to breathe on his own." And so Lucas, he started to turn it around the first time, and he started to breathe more and more on his own. And some days later, he was off the ventilator. To me, it was a miracle, to be honest. I was so
You know
thankful for your visit.
there's an expression which we like to use, which is God is seldom early but never late. and that's that's the way it was, right?
Oh
That
yeah.
was the way it was. I mean, the difference between the first time I met Lucas and the second time was the fact that the second time you had hope, the first time you had lost hope, but the
Yes. Yep.
second time you had hope. And, St. Paul says, hope never disappoints. So, for many people who might be listening to this podcast, to realize that we always have to have hope, that God wills us to have hope, and He wants us to have hope because God can do anything, virtually anything. So, so we go on. So now I've left again. I've gone
Yeah.
back. I've come back east again, and I'm
it's
back
it's
in my. Yeah.
it's funny because Brother Paul kept appearing in my lives in our lives, but we really never had many conversations. Like we didn't sit down and say, how was life? You were still were very mysterious to me. The most that I've ever learned was going to your healing service. Other
Right.
than that, we never had any in-depth conversations. So there was still very much a mystery. It's like, wow, this is just my mind is so blown. I I'm just in awe when I just don't have the words. That's all I can do is be in awe. So we continue. Life continues. Brother Paul goes back to New Jersey, and Lucas gets released from the hospital. Unfortunately, it was more or less like, yes, he survived this, but you have to pray for a transplant sooner than later because there's nothing more that we can do. So they basically sent us home to be together, because there was nothing that they could do. And he was gravely ill at this point. I mean, at random, he would get these bouts of respiratory distress that not even oxygen would help with. So they didn't even send us home with any oxygen to support him because there was nothing they could do. So he would just out of nowhere, he would eat a bite of a cracker and he would go into respiratory distress 70, 80 times a minute. He would start breathing and huffing and puffing, and his eyes would glaze over, and it would just scare me. And I would think, maybe this could be it, and I just have to be willing to say goodbye. And I always thought, no matter what, at this point, I'm thinking to myself, no matter what, I knew that God was going to take care of Lucas. Either he was going to heal him in heaven or he was going to heal him on earth. But no matter what, God was going to take care of him. So that gave me a lot of peace during these life and death moments that we continue to face.
The the From my perspective, at this point in time, Jessica and I had more continuous conversation to kind of check on where Lucas was until one day she got to the point where I felt that the end was coming.
Yeah.
And I told my assistant, listen, you know, I'm going tomorrow. I'm going to go again. I'm going back to Pittsburgh. Make me a flight. Get a flight for me. Things are really dark
Yeah.
here. I need to get there, and I'll never forget this day for the rest of my life. My flight was supposed to be at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I got to Newark Airport at like 8 o'clock in the morning, and I got to the gate and I waited, and the flight was delayed, and they kept saying, well, no, it's going to be at 11:30. And as the day progressed, my anxiety started to rise because I was feeling like I needed to get there. I felt this incredible push to get there, for Lucas, and yet it seemed that I couldn't get out of Newark. I couldn't get away. And it went all day long from 10 o'clock in the morning until finally at 5:30 they actually canceled the flight, and there was no other flight for me to get at that point in time. And all I kept thinking to myself was, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to make it. And then something kind of extraordinary happened. God said to me, don't worry, it's going to be taken care of. And I think we should stop there, because this is like good TV. We want people to tune in to the next episode of the podcast. But that's what happened that day to me, and certainly it was amazing. It was an amazing journey, and we hadn't even gotten anywhere yet, but it was an amazing journey.
Yes, I thought so too, Brother Paul.
Yeah. So we look forward to continuing this journey together, and I'll kind of emphasize for your sake, that we're doing this really because we want to encourage people to not give up hope when things seem so down, so terrible, to realize that God is with them. That poem Footprints, where in the sand, which is that poem about where someone sees the two sets of footprints and then only one, and then Jesus says, well, it was on me who was carrying you. Well, that's certainly the case, and so we want people to have hope, the way St. Paul says, hope never disappoints. And we want people to take a more active interest in becoming donors, both live and and organ transplant volunteers, right?
Yeah, yeah. So Lucas is going to need another transplant, like we said earlier, and living donor is an option for Lucas. So those with an O blood type who are healthy and ages 20 to 49 can actually sign up to be a living donor for Lucas. And at the end of this, I'll post these links below. Lucas also has a register me page, which means if you check your license and you're an adult and you don't have organ donor on your license, you can actually sign up to be an organ donor in honor of Lucas on his register me page, and I'll also post that below here. But yeah, we're on another journey, and Brother Paul, we have extreme hope that God is going to take care of everything, because not only is he going to take care of it, but he's going to make it extremely beautiful in some way, shape, or form. And why? Because he's as close as a whispered prayer.
Amen.
Amen to that. Yep.
So thank you for having us with you today.
Yes. Look for the next podcast. Thanks for joining.